Billionaire hires struggling single mom as chef but falls desperately in love with her. Picture this: Carter Winslow, powerful venture capitalist worth $300 million, has Julie Wright pressed against his kitchen island, her legs wrapped around his waist, months of suppressed desire finally exploding between them. His voice is rough against her neck as he whispers, "Stay with me," and she responds by pulling him closer, surrendering to the fire that's been burning between them since the day they met. But how did we get here? How did a struggling single mom and a man who controlled billion-dollar deals end up lost in each other's arms, their hearts beating as one? Let me tell you their story. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our Dear Love Diaries family. Your special place in this community of heartfelt stories is waiting for you. These passionate journeys of souls connecting against all odds have brought together thousands of beautiful hearts just like yours. Make sure you hit the bell too, so you'll know immediately when a new story unfolds in our diary of love. Chapter 1. 3 months earlier, Julie Wright stared at the eviction notice in her trembling hands, the words blurring through unshed tears. 21 days. That's all the time she had before she and her 8-year-old son Dante would be homeless again. "Mom?" Dante's voice drifted from the living room where he sat cross-legged on the worn carpet, homework spread around him like fallen leaves. "Are we moving again?" Julie quickly folded the notice and tucked it into her purse. "Just some paperwork, baby. Keep working on your math." But Dante wasn't fooled. At 8 years old, he'd already lived through too many sudden moves, too many whispered phone calls about money, too many nights when his mom thought he was asleep but he could hear her crying in the kitchen. Smart kids always knew when their world was falling apart. Julie's phone buzzed. A text from her best friend Bella: "Emergency coffee. Now. I found something." 20 minutes later, Julie sat across from Bella at their usual diner, nursing a coffee she couldn't afford while Bella slid a printed job listing across the table with the excitement of someone delivering a winning lottery ticket. "Live-in chef and household manager," Bella read aloud. "Hampton's estate. Salary, $25,000 per month, plus full room and board for employee and 1 child." Julie nearly choked on her coffee. 25,000? That has to be a typo. It's not. My principal knows the placement agency handling this. The client is some billionaire who needs to lay low for a while. Corporate scandal or something. He's offering serious money because he needs someone immediately, and complete discretion. Julie's mind raced through possibilities like a calculator running overtime. 25,000 a month would solve everything. She could pay off the crushing debt her ex-husband had left her with, save for Dante's future, maybe even think about opening the restaurant she'd dreamed of since culinary school. "What's the catch?" Julie asked, because there was always a catch. Rich people didn't throw money around without expecting something in return. You'd have to live at his estate. Full-time. No days off, no personal life outside the job. Bella's expression turned serious. And Julie. These rich men, they're used to getting what they want. Just, be careful. That evening, Julie stood before her bathroom mirror, trying to decide what to wear to an interview that could change everything. The black blazer made her look serious, but the buttons pulled slightly across her chest. The navy dress was more flattering but maybe too informal for a billionaire's standards. Everything in her closet told the story of a woman making do, stretching every dollar, keeping up appearances when her world was crumbling. She chose the blazer and hoped for the best. The address led her through increasingly exclusive neighborhoods until she reached a private road lined with towering hedges that screamed old money and privacy. The estate that emerged from behind them took her breath away. Glass and stone melded together in architectural perfection, the house seeming to float above manicured grounds that swept down to a private beach where sailboats dotted the horizon. Julie parked her 8-year-old Honda between a gleaming Tesla and a vintage Porsche, feeling like she was 12 years old again, watching rich kids through the fence at the country club where her mother had cleaned rooms. The front door opened before she could knock. Carter Winslow filled the doorway, and Julie's prepared introduction died in her throat. She'd expected an older man, maybe soft around the edges from years of executive lunches and board meetings. She hadn't expected this. He stood 6'2" with broad shoulders that strained against his white dress shirt like he'd rather be moving than sitting behind a desk. His dark hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and his gray eyes studied her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. This wasn't the face of a man who'd gone soft with success. This was raw power wrapped in expensive clothes, controlled strength that made her want to step closer and run away at the same time. "Ms. Wright?" His voice was deeper than she'd expected, with a slight roughness that sent warmth spreading through her chest. "Yes, I'm here about the chef position." She was proud that her voice came out steady despite the way those gray eyes seemed to see straight through her defenses. His gaze swept over her, not in the dismissive way she'd grown used to from her ex-husband, but with genuine attention that made her hyper-aware of every detail. The way her blazer fit. How she'd tucked her hair behind her ear. The slight tremor in her hands that she hoped he wouldn't notice but suspected he already had. "Come in." He stepped aside, and she caught the scent of his cologne as she passed. Something expensive and masculine that made her think of ocean air and cedar, clean and sophisticated in a way that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The interior of the house was even more impressive than the exterior. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the sound that looked like a painting, while the open floor plan created a sense of space that Julie's cramped apartment couldn't touch. But what drew her attention wasn't the obvious wealth, it was how empty it all felt. Beautiful but cold. Like a magazine spread where no one actually lived, where life happened somewhere else. "The kitchen is this way," Carter said, leading her through the main living area. The kitchen was a chef's dream and Julie's personal fantasy made real. Professional-grade appliances that hummed with quiet efficiency, marble countertops that probably cost more than Julie made in a year, and a pantry that looked like it belonged in a high-end restaurant. The space was designed for someone who understood cooking, who appreciated the art and craft of creating something beautiful and delicious. But like the rest of the house, it felt unused. Pristine but lifeless, as if no one had ever laughed here or burned toast or argued over whose turn it was to do dishes. "Tell me about your experience," Carter said, leaning against the island with his arms crossed, "all business now." Julie launched into the summary she'd practiced in the car. Culinary school on a scholarship because she'd been determined to make something of herself. 3 years at a respected restaurant before she'd had to leave when Dante was born and childcare became more expensive than her salary. Catering jobs that worked around single motherhood, building a reputation one dinner party at a time. She watched his face for signs of disappointment when she mentioned her son, but his expression remained neutral, unreadable. "Can you cook for dietary restrictions?" he asked, all crisp efficiency. "Of course. Allergies, medical needs, personal preferences. I can adapt to anything. I've catered for vegans, diabetics, people with celiac disease. Food should be inclusive, not exclusive." "And you're comfortable with the live-in arrangement? No boyfriend or family obligations that would interfere?" "My ex-husband is out of the picture." Julie kept her voice steady. "It's just me and my son Dante. He's 8, well-behaved, and won't be any trouble." Something flickered across Carter's features at that, something almost like pain. Children should never be trouble. They should be treasured. The unexpected warmth in his voice caught her off guard. She'd steeled herself for questions about childcare arrangements, maybe resistance to having a child disturb his perfect house. She hadn't expected understanding, hadn't expected him to sound like he actually meant what he said. "Would you be willing to prepare a demonstration meal?" Carter asked, back to business. "I'd like to see you work." "Absolutely." She moved through his kitchen with growing confidence, her hands finding their rhythm as she planned a simple but elegant meal. Seared salmon with lemon herb butter, roasted vegetables that would showcase proper technique, wild rice pilaf with toasted almonds. Nothing too complicated, but enough to show her skills without appearing to show off. Carter watched from the island, and Julie found herself hyper-aware of his presence in a way that was both distracting and oddly comforting. When she reached past him for the olive oil, she caught his sharp intake of breath and felt answering heat spiral through her chest. When she bent to check the oven, she felt his eyes on her, tracking her movements with an intensity that made her skin tingle with awareness. "The salmon should be ready in about 10 minutes, she said, turning to find him closer than she'd expected. They were separated by less than 3 feet, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, close enough to count his eyelashes if she wanted to. "You move like you belong in a kitchen," he said, his voice slightly rough around the edges. "I do belong in a kitchen." The words came out with more force than she'd intended, like a declaration of war against everyone who'd ever told her she should be grateful for whatever scraps life threw her way. "This is what I'm meant to do." Something shifted in his expression, surprise giving way to something that looked almost like respect. "When can you start?" Julie blinked, certain she'd misheard. "You're offering me the job?" "You're hired." The words came out rougher than intended, and Carter cleared his throat. "Assuming you want it." "Want it?" This job was the answer to every prayer she'd whispered in the dark, every desperate plea for a way to give Dante the stability he deserved, every dream she'd buried under the weight of reality. "I want it," she said, meaning it more than she'd ever meant anything in her life. Carter nodded once, sharp and decisive like a man who was used to making million-dollar decisions. "Good. Can you move in this weekend?" 3 days later, Julie stood in the same kitchen with 2 battered suitcases and a confused 8-year-old who kept staring around like he'd stepped into a movie. "It's like a castle," Dante said, his eyes wide as he took in the soaring ceilings and ocean views that stretched beyond the windows. "It's Mr. Winslow's house," Julie corrected gently, because she needed him to understand the difference. "We're here to work, remember? This is a job, not a fairy tale." "Will Mr. Winslow live here too?" Before Julie could answer, Carter appeared in the doorway like he'd been summoned by their conversation. He'd traded his interview clothes for dark jeans and a gray sweater that made his eyes look like storm clouds. Somehow, the casual clothes made him even more imposing, more real, more dangerous to her peace of mind. "You must be Dante," Carter said, his voice gentler than Julie had heard it before, like he understood that children required a different approach. Dante stepped slightly behind Julie's legs, suddenly shy in the way 8-year-olds got when faced with important adults. "Yes, sir." Carter crouched down to Dante's eye level, bringing his imposing height closer to child size, making himself less intimidating. "I'm Carter. This is going to be your home too, so I want you to be comfortable here. Are you hungry? Your mom makes incredible food." "She makes the best pancakes," Dante said, warming up despite himself, because any adult who talked about his mom's cooking was clearly a person of good judgment. "I'll have to try them sometime." Carter's smile was genuine, transforming his severe features completely, and Julie felt something dangerous flutter in her chest. She prepared herself for a demanding boss, maybe someone who tolerated Dante's presence as a necessary evil. She hadn't prepared for this man who spoke to her son like he mattered, who smiled at him like children were a gift instead of an inconvenience. Drop a comment below and tell us about a time when you knew someone was going to change your life the moment you met them. What was that instant spark like for you? The first week fell into a rhythm that surprised Julie with its ease. Carter left early for runs along the beach, returning with his hair damp and his cheeks flushed from the ocean air as she prepared breakfast. He worked from his home office during the day, emerging for meals that gradually became longer conversations about everything and nothing. Dante adjusted faster than Julie had dared hope, charmed by Carter's willingness to answer questions about his cars and the boats visible from the windows. But it was the small moments that began to crack Julie's defenses. Carter asking about her day while she cooked dinner, like her answer actually mattered to him. His genuine interest when she mentioned her dream of opening a restaurant someday, listening like her ambitions were worth taking seriously. The way he listened to Dante's stories about school with actual attention, not the polite tolerance she'd learned to expect from men who weren't related to her son. And then there were the moments that made her pulse race and her skin warm with awareness. When Carter handed her coffee in the morning, his fingers brushing hers for just a second longer than necessary. The way he watched her cook, like she was performing magic instead of simply preparing food, like every movement she made was worth studying. How his presence filled the kitchen even when he wasn't speaking, commanding attention without trying. Julie told herself it was just proximity. Forced intimacy from sharing space with a man who commanded attention like other people breathed. But deep down, in the places where she was most honest with herself, she knew it was more dangerous than that. She was attracted to Carter Winslow, and that attraction grew stronger every day. The end of the second week brought the incident that changed everything between them. Julie was preparing dinner, distracted by an overdue notice from Dante's school and trying to calculate whether she could afford the field trip fee from her first paycheck. The salmon was perfect, the vegetables roasted to golden perfection, but her mind was elsewhere, caught up in the endless mental math of single motherhood. She reached for the cast iron pan without thinking, forgetting that she'd grabbed a thin dish towel instead of the proper mitt. The handle burned through the fabric instantly, and Julie gasped as pain shot through her palm and she nearly dropped the heavy pan. The cast iron wobbled dangerously toward the floor, still searing hot and full of perfectly prepared food that would have been ruined, wasted, along with all her careful work. Carter appeared beside her like magic, his hand catching her wrist to steady her, the other reaching for the pan handle with a proper mitt that materialized from nowhere. He moved with the kind of quick reflexes that saved disasters, but Julie could barely focus on his efficiency. His hand was wrapped around her wrist, skin against skin, and the contact sent shockwaves through her entire body like touching a live wire. She could feel her pulse hammering against his thumb, could see the exact moment when he became aware of it too, when his breathing changed and his grip tightened. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough with concern, but Julie could barely process his words through the electricity crackling between them. His thumb traced across her pulse point, a gentle touch that somehow felt more intimate than a kiss, and she felt the sensation everywhere, racing down her spine, pooling low in her belly, making her breath catch and her knees weak. Julie. Her name was barely a whisper, like a prayer or a confession. She looked up to find his gray eyes dark with something that had nothing to do with concern for her safety and everything to do with the way her lips had parted, the way she was leaning toward him like metal drawn to a magnet. "I'm not hurt," she managed to say, but her voice came out breathy and unsteady, giving away everything she was trying to hide. Carter's grip tightened slightly, as if he couldn't bring himself to let go, as if touching her had become as necessary as breathing. The air between them crackled with electricity, heavy with unspoken desire and the weight of all the reasons they shouldn't be standing this close, breathing each other's air, drowning in each other's eyes. "Good," he said finally, but he didn't step away. His voice had dropped to that rough register that made heat spread through her chest and her thoughts scatter like leaves in the wind. "That's good." Neither of them moved. The kitchen filled with the sound of their slightly uneven breathing, the tension stretching taut between them like a wire about to snap, like the moment before lightning strikes. Then Dante's voice called from the living room, innocent and oblivious. "Mom, is dinner ready?" "I'm starving." The spell broke like glass hitting concrete. Carter dropped her wrist like it had burned him, stepping back with a sharp breath that might have been relief or frustration. Julie turned toward the stove with shaking hands, trying to pretend her world hadn't just tilted completely off its axis. "5 minutes, baby," she called back, her voice only slightly unsteady, a minor miracle considering her heart was beating like she'd run a marathon. When she turned around, Carter was gone, leaving only the memory of his touch burning against her wrist like a brand. That night, Julie lay in the guest room that had become her sanctuary, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what had happened. The memory of Carter's touch burned against her wrist like a tattoo, permanent and undeniable. She could still feel the heat of his hand, still see the dark hunger in his eyes before Dante's voice had broken whatever spell had fallen over them. This was dangerous territory, the kind that destroyed lives and broke hearts. She was an employee living in his house, dependent on his goodwill for her son's stability and their future. Getting involved with Carter would be the kind of mistake that destroyed everything she'd worked to build, everything she'd sacrificed to protect. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams were filled with gray eyes and gentle hands, and the memory of her name whispered like a prayer. Chapter 2. The days following the kitchen incident crackled with tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Carter found excuses to linger during meals, his eyes following Julie's movements with an intensity that made her skin burn. Julie caught herself stealing glances when he wasn't looking, memorizing the way he rubbed his jaw when thinking, how his shoulders moved beneath his shirts when he reached for something. They danced around each other in circles, both aware that something fundamental had shifted between them, neither willing to be the first to acknowledge what was happening. Carter had always been a man who controlled his environment, but Julie Wright was chaos wrapped in grace, and she was unraveling him thread by thread. He began taking longer routes through the kitchen, timing his appearances to coincide with her cooking. He told himself he was simply checking on the household, but the truth was simpler and more dangerous. He was addicted to watching her work. There was something mesmerizing about Julie in her element. The confident way she moved, testing seasoning with an intuition that couldn't be taught, the little sounds of satisfaction she made when a dish came together perfectly. When she cooked, all her walls came down, no careful politeness, no employee boundaries, just pure passion and skill. And Carter found himself desperately wanting to know what it would feel like to have that passion focused on him. "You're staring again," Julie said without turning around from the stove where she was preparing his morning eggs, a smile evident in her voice. Carter's coffee mug paused halfway to his lips. "Was I?" She glanced over her shoulder with a look that made his pulse skip. "I don't mind." The simple honesty of her words hit him like a physical blow. She didn't mind. She was aware of his attention and she welcomed it, even as they both pretended nothing had changed between them. "How did you learn to cook like this?" he asked, genuinely curious but also desperate to keep her talking, to hear that warm voice that had started haunting his dreams. "My grandmother." Julie's expression softened in a way that made something tight in Carter's chest loosen. "She raised me after my parents died. Said cooking was love made visible, and the best way to take care of people was to feed them properly." "She sounds wise." She was. Julie plated his eggs with the same care she brought to everything, arranging fresh herbs like she was creating art. She would have loved this kitchen. All this space and these beautiful tools. She cooked magic in a kitchen half this size. Carter watched her hands as she worked, elegant fingers that moved with practiced precision, and found himself wondering what those gentle touches would feel like against his skin. The thought was so vivid, so immediate, that he had to grip his coffee mug tighter to keep from reaching for her. "What about you?" Julie asked, setting the plate before him, close enough that he caught her scent, something light and floral that made him think of spring mornings. "Any family traditions around food?" Carter's expression shuddered. "My parents were too busy building their empire to worry about family dinners. I learned early that business came first, everything else was secondary." "That must have been lonely." The quiet compassion in her voice almost undid him. No judgment, no pity, just understanding that cut straight through his defenses. "I survived." Surviving isn't the same as living. Julie's amber eyes met his, and Carter felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with physical nakedness. She saw too much, understood too much, made him want things he'd convinced himself he didn't need. "No," he said quietly. "It's not." Before he could say something that would cross lines neither of them was ready for, Dante bounded into the kitchen wearing his school backpack and a grin that reminded Carter of Julie's. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." "Mom, did you remember to pack my lunch?" "Of course I did." Julie ruffled her son's hair affectionately. "Turkey and cheese, apple slices, and those crackers you like. Can I see your car collection later?" Dante asked Carter hopefully. "I finished my homework early and Mom said I could ask." "If your mother says it's okay," Carter replied, glancing at Julie for permission he didn't really need but wanted anyway. We'll see how the day goes, Julie said, but Carter caught the small nod that meant yes. These small domestic moments were becoming precious to Carter in a way that should have terrified him. The easy back and forth between mother and son, being included in their morning routine, the way Dante looked at him with open admiration, it was everything he'd convinced himself he didn't want. But watching Julie with her son revealed depths to her character that made Carter's attraction deepen into something more dangerous. The fierce love in her eyes when she looked at Dante, her patience with his endless questions, the way she balanced being both mother and father to a boy who deserved the world. Carter was falling for both of them, and that realization should have sent him running. Instead, it made him want to stay forever. That evening brought the storm that would change everything between them. Julie was preparing dinner when the lights flickered, thunder rolling across the sound like artillery fire. "Looks like we're in for a big one," Carter said, appearing in the kitchen doorway just as rain began pelting the windows with increasing force. "Should I be worried?" Julie asked, glancing at the darkening sky that looked like something out of a disaster movie. "The house has a generator. We'll be fine." As if the weather wanted to prove him wrong, the lights went out completely, plunging them into darkness broken only by the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the kitchen in stark black and white. "Mom?" Dante's voice carried from upstairs, uncertain but not quite scared. "It's okay, baby," Julie called back. "Just a power outage." Carter's phone flashlight cut through the darkness as he moved to a cabinet. "I keep candles and matches in here for situations like this." Soon, the kitchen and living room glowed with warm candlelight, transforming the modern space into something intimate and magical. Dante came downstairs in his pajamas, wide-eyed at the dramatic change but not frightened, with his mother and Carter there to keep him safe. "It's like camping," Dante said, settling onto the couch between Julie and Carter. "Have you been camping before?" Carter asked. "Not real camping," Dante admitted. "But Mom and I pretend sometimes when the electricity gets turned off." The innocent honesty of the statement hit Carter like a punch to the gut, reminding him of the financial struggles that had brought Julie to his door, the desperation she tried so hard to hide. "Well," Carter said gently, "maybe we can arrange some real camping sometime. There are beautiful spots upstate with lakes and hiking trails." Dante's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? With a tent and everything?" "If your mom agrees." Julie's smile was soft in the candlelight. "We'll see." They spent the evening playing board games and telling stories, the storm raging outside while their small circle of light provided perfect sanctuary. Carter found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years, caught up in Dante's infectious laughter and Julie's quiet joy as she watched her son being genuinely happy. When Dante finally fell asleep between them on the couch, curled up like a puppy with his head on Julie's lap, Carter and Julie worked together to move him to his room. The domestic intimacy of tucking Dante in, Julie smoothing his hair while Carter adjusted his blankets, felt more natural than breathing. "Thank you," Julie whispered as they stepped into the hallway. "For making this feel like an adventure instead of something scary." "He's a good kid," Carter replied. "You've done an incredible job with him. Some days I'm not sure I'm doing anything right." They walked back downstairs together, the candles casting dancing shadows on the walls. Without Dante's chatter to fill the silence, the air between them grew thick with awareness, charged with possibilities neither wanted to name. Julie poured 2 glasses of wine from a bottle Carter had opened earlier, settling onto the couch where they'd spent the evening. Carter joined her, close enough that he could catch the scent of her perfume, something light and floral that made him think of spring mornings and new beginnings. "Can I ask you something?" Julie said, her voice soft in the flickering light. "Anything. What really happened with your business?" "The scandal they're talking about in the news." Carter's jaw tightened, muscles bunching with tension. He'd been waiting for this question, dreading it, knowing that his answer might change how she saw him forever. "My business partner made some questionable trades," he said finally. "When the SEC started investigating, she claimed I authorized them." "But you didn't." "It wasn't a question," and the certainty in Julie's voice surprised him. She believed in his innocence without proof, without hesitation, like faith was as natural as breathing. No. I didn't. Then why aren't you fighting it? Why are you hiding out here instead of defending yourself? Carter was quiet for a long moment, staring into the wine glass he rotated between his hands. The candlelight caught the amber liquid, making it glow like liquid gold. Because proving my innocence would mean destroying evidence that protects a lot of innocent people. Pension funds, retirement accounts, if the whole truth comes out, thousands of people will lose everything they've worked for their entire lives. Julie set down her wine glass and turned to face him fully, her expression shifting as understanding dawned. So you're sacrificing your reputation to protect them. It seemed like the right thing to do. That's... Julie shook her head, something profound shifting in how she looked at him. That's incredible. Most people would have thrown everyone else under the bus to save themselves. My parents taught me that business came first, Carter said quietly. But they were wrong. People come first. Doing the right thing comes first, even when it costs you everything. The warmth in Julie's amber eyes made Carter's chest tight. She was looking at him like he was someone worth admiring, someone worthy of her respect, and the feeling was more intoxicating than the wine. You're not what I expected, Julie said softly. What did you expect? Someone cold. Calculating. Used to getting his way regardless of who got hurt. She smiled slightly. Someone who wouldn't care if an 8-year-old boy wanted to see his car collection, or notice if his chef was struggling with old wounds. And instead? Julie's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Instead, I got someone who makes me feel safe for the first time in years. The words hung between them like a confession, heavy with meaning and possibility. Carter felt his control, the iron discipline that had ruled his life for decades, begin to fracture under the weight of her honesty. Julie. Her name was rough on his lips, a warning and a prayer wrapped together. She shifted closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin, could count the flecks of gold in her amber eyes. My ex-husband spent 3 years telling me I was worthless. That I was lucky anyone would want me, especially with a kid in tow. Carter's hands clenched into fists at the pain in her voice, rage building in his chest for a man who would hurt this incredible woman. He was wrong. Was he? Julie's vulnerability in that moment nearly broke him. Because sometimes I look in the mirror and I still hear his voice telling me I'm not enough. Carter moved without thinking, his hand coming up to cup her face with infinite gentleness. He was wrong, he repeated, his voice fierce with conviction. You're extraordinary. Julie's breath caught at his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for just a moment before opening to meet his gaze with an intensity that stole his breath. Carter. They were inches apart now, sharing the same air, drowning in each other's eyes. Carter could feel his resolve crumbling, could feel the walls he'd built around his heart beginning to collapse like a house of cards. You make me want things I convinced myself I didn't need, he admitted roughly. What kind of things? A home. A family. Someone to come back to at the end of the day who sees me for who I really am, not what I can provide or how useful I might be. Julie's hand came up to cover his where it still cupped her cheek. I see you, she whispered. The space between them disappeared as if drawn by magnetic force. Carter's other hand came up to frame her face, his thumbs tracing the elegant line of her cheekbones like he was memorizing her features. Julie's lips parted slightly, her breathing shallow and quick. If we do this, Carter said roughly, there's no going back. I know. Their mouths were a breath apart, hearts hammering in unison, the air between them electric with promise and possibility, when Dante's voice cut through the charged atmosphere like a knife. Mom? I'm thirsty. They sprang apart like they'd been burned, the spell broken but the electricity still crackling between them. Julie's hand went to her lips, her eyes wide and dark with unfulfilled desire. Coming, baby, she called back, her voice only slightly unsteady. As she disappeared up the stairs to tend to her son, Carter remained on the couch, his hands shaking as he raked them through his hair. They'd been seconds away from crossing a line that would have changed everything between them, and part of him was grateful for the interruption. The other part was burning with frustrated need that made his entire body ache. That night, Carter lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, the memory of Julie's almost kiss scorching through his veins like fire. Down the hall, Julie tossed and turned in her own bed, her skin still tingling from his touch, her lips aching for what had almost been. Neither of them slept well, and both knew that something fundamental had shifted between them. The question was whether they were brave enough to pursue it, or wise enough to walk away before they both got burned. The morning brought brilliant sunshine and the return of power, but it couldn't dispel the change that had settled over the house like a spell. Carter and Julie moved around each other with hyper-awareness, every accidental touch electric, every shared glance loaded with memory and promise. They were playing with fire, and they both knew it. But neither of them seemed able to stop. Chapter 3. The next few weeks passed in a haze of stolen glances and barely restrained desire. Carter found reasons to be in the kitchen while Julie cooked, their conversations growing more personal with each passing day. Julie discovered herself watching for Carter's return from his morning runs, drawn to the windows like she was watching for a lover instead of her employer. They were falling into something deeper than attraction, something that felt dangerously like the kind of love that changed everything. The shift showed in 1,000 small ways. Carter started buying premium ingredients without being asked, somehow knowing exactly what Julie needed to create her culinary magic. Julie began preparing Carter's coffee exactly how he liked it without needing to ask, having memorized his preferences through careful observation that had nothing to do with being a good employee. Dante became the bridge between them, his innocent observations cutting through their adult pretenses with startling clarity. "Mom, why do you smile different when Mr. Carter's around?" he asked one morning while they waited for the school bus, his 8-year-old directness catching Julie completely off guard. Julie nearly choked on her coffee. "What do you mean? Your regular smile is pretty, but your Mr. Carter smile is." Dante scrunched his face in concentration, trying to find the right words. "It's like you have a secret that makes you happy inside." Out of the mouths of babes. Julie's cheeks heated as she realized her 8-year-old son had noticed something she'd been trying desperately to hide from everyone, including herself. "Mr. Carter is our boss, Dante. I'm just being professional." "Okay," Dante said agreeably, but his skeptical expression suggested he wasn't buying it for a second. That afternoon, Carter found Dante in the garage, circling his vintage Porsche with obvious admiration and reverence most people reserved for sacred artifacts. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Carter said, joining the boy. "She's the coolest car I've ever seen." "Does she go really fast?" "Fast enough," Carter smiled. "Would you like to sit in the driver's seat?" Dante's eyes went wide with excitement that only 8-year-olds could manage. "Really? Mom won't be mad?" "I think she'll understand." Carter lifted Dante into the driver's seat, watching the boy's face light up as he gripped the steering wheel and made vrooming sounds that echoed off the garage walls. It was such a normal father-son moment that Carter felt his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. "Mr. Carter?" Dante's voice was suddenly serious in the way that made adults nervous. "Are you going to marry my mom?" The question hit Carter like a physical blow, stealing his breath. "What makes you ask that?" "You look at her the way the dads look at the moms in movies. And she gets that happy secret smile when you're around. Plus, you're really nice to us, and Mom said people are only that nice when they really care about someone." Carter crouched down beside the car, meeting Dante's earnest gaze. "Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. Your mom is very special. And so are you. But are you going to marry her?" The hope in Dante's voice was almost Carter's undoing. This child who'd been let down by the men in his life was ready to trust again, ready to believe in the possibility of a real family, and Carter didn't want to be another disappointment. "I care about both of you very much," Carter said gently. "But grown-up relationships are complicated. That's what adults always say when they're scared, Dante replied with devastating 8-year-old wisdom. Carter stared at the boy, stunned by his perceptiveness. You might be right about that. Meanwhile, Julie was dealing with her own complications. Her sister Naomi had driven out from the city for an unexpected visit, and her skeptical expression as she surveyed Carter's estate made Julie's stomach clench with anxiety. So this is where you're living, Naomi said, her tone neutral as they sat in the pristine living room, but Julie could hear the judgment underneath. It's temporary, Julie replied, hating how defensive she sounded. Just until I can save enough to get back on my feet. Naomi's dark eyes missed nothing, cataloging expensive furniture and art like she was taking inventory. And your boss? The billionaire who hired a single mom to live in his house? What's he like? Julie felt heat creep up her neck. He's professional. Kind to Dante. It's a good situation. Julie. Naomi's voice softened with concern that came from watching someone you love make the same mistakes over and over. I know that look. You're falling for him. I am not. Yes, you are. You get the same expression you had when you first started dating Marcus, all dreamy and hopeful and ready to believe in fairy tales again. Naomi's expression turned grim. And we both know how that ended. The mention of Julie's ex-husband was like a bucket of ice water dumped over her head. Marcus had been charming too, in the beginning. Attentive and generous, making her feel special and chosen until the day he'd started tearing her down piece by piece, convincing her she was lucky anyone would want damaged goods. Carter's not like Marcus, Julie said quietly, but even as she said it, doubt crept in. Rich men are all alike when it comes to what they want from women like us, Naomi replied bluntly. They want the fantasy, the excitement of playing house with someone beneath their social class. But when it comes time to introduce you to their world, when the novelty wears off, you'll be yesterday's news, and Dante will be collateral damage. Julie flinched at the harsh words, but part of her wondered if Naomi was right. What future could she realistically have with Carter Winslow? She was a single mom with massive debt and a high school education. He was a billionaire who moved in circles she couldn't even imagine, who probably had debutantes and socialites throwing themselves at him daily. I need to protect Dante, Julie said finally. And myself. Good, Naomi said firmly. Because that boy has been through enough disappointment. Don't let some rich man's attention make you forget what's really important. That evening, Julie was quieter than usual as she prepared dinner, Naomi's words echoing in her head like a broken record. When Carter appeared in the kitchen, she barely looked up from the cutting board where she was chopping vegetables with more force than necessary. Everything okay? He asked, noting her subdued mood and the tension in her shoulders. Fine. Just tired. But Carter had learned to read Julie's moods like a favorite book, and this wasn't tiredness. This was withdrawal, the same distance she'd maintained in their first week together before the walls had started coming down. Did I do something wrong? He asked quietly. Julie's knife paused mid-chop. No. You've been nothing but professional. The word professional hit Carter like a slap across the face. After weeks of growing intimacy, after the almost kiss during the storm, she was retreating behind formal boundaries like none of it had meant anything. Professional, he repeated slowly, tasting the word like poison. Yes. Julie's voice was steady, but Carter caught the slight tremor in her hands that gave away her true feelings. That's what this is. A professional arrangement. Carter stepped closer, close enough that she had to look at him, close enough to see the pain she was trying to hide behind professionalism. Is that what you want it to be? Julie's amber eyes were bright with unshed tears, and Carter realized someone had gotten to her. Someone had reminded her of all the reasons why she should keep her distance from him, had planted seeds of doubt about his intentions. It's what it needs to be, she said softly, but her voice broke slightly on the words. Before Carter could respond, Dante bounced into the kitchen, breaking the tension with his usual exuberant energy. Mom. Mr. Carter let me sit in his sports car. It was amazing. Julie managed a smile for her son, but Carter caught the way she avoided his eyes for the rest of the evening, building walls between them with every polite interaction. The distance Julie was trying to maintain became impossible when the media storm found them. It started with a single photographer camping outside the estate gates, but within days there were vans and cameras lining the private road like an invading army. Carter's corporate scandal had taken a vicious new turn, with fresh allegations and leaked documents that painted him as the mastermind behind illegal trades. The headlines were brutal: Billionaire's web of deceit and How Carter Winslow Betrayed Investors' Trust. Julie watched Carter's jaw clench as he read the morning news on his tablet, saw the way his shoulders carried new tension like he was bracing for physical blows. The man being portrayed in the media bore no resemblance to the gentle, honorable person she'd come to know. "It's not true," she said quietly, the words escaping before she could stop them. Carter looked up, surprise flickering across his features. "What makes you say that?" "Because I know you." The words came out with more conviction than Julie had expected, cutting through all her carefully constructed walls. "The man who plays cards with my son and makes sure we have everything we need isn't capable of stealing from innocent people." Something in Carter's expression cracked open, raw vulnerability bleeding through his usual control. "Thank you," he said roughly. "You have no idea what it means to hear someone say that." But their moment of connection was shattered when they discovered photographers had followed Dante to school, snapping pictures of an 8-year-old boy who had nothing to do with any scandal, turning him into tabloid fodder. Julie's protective fury was swift and fierce, mama bear instincts roaring to life. "They can't do this," she said, pacing the kitchen with clenched fists. "He's a child." Carter was already on his phone, calling his lawyer, his security team, anyone who could make the harassment stop. Watching Julie's maternal rage, seeing how this invasion was affecting both her and Dante, made him feel sick with guilt. "I'm sorry," he said when he'd finished his calls. "I never meant for this to touch you and Dante." "I know." Julie's anger wasn't directed at him, and that somehow made Carter feel worse. She should blame him. She should pack up and leave to protect her son from the circus that followed him everywhere. Instead, she surprised him. "We're not going anywhere," she said firmly, chin lifted with stubborn determination. "Those vultures want a story? Well, they're not getting one from us." Have you ever been in a situation where you wanted someone so badly but knew you shouldn't? Tell us in the comments how you handled that overwhelming attraction when everything was at stake. The siege continued for days, transforming their peaceful sanctuary into a fortress under attack. Carter hired additional security, but the damage was done. They were trapped, their privacy shattered, their growing intimacy twisted into something the world could watch and judge. The pressure began to show in all of them. Dante grew quieter, confused by the attention and frightened by the shouting photographers who treated him like a commodity instead of a child. Julie became hypervigilant, checking windows constantly and jumping at unexpected sounds. Carter retreated into himself, the guilt of involving them in his mess eating him alive. It was during this dark time that Julie discovered the truth about Carter's situation, and everything changed between them forever. She'd gone to his study late one evening to bring him coffee, finding him staring out the windows at the media encampment with dead eyes that spoke of a man pushed beyond his limits. Documents were scattered across his desk, and Julie couldn't help but notice the official letterhead on several of them. "Carter," she said softly. "You need to eat something." He turned, and Julie was shocked by how exhausted he looked. This strong, controlled man was fracturing under the pressure, and her heart ached for him in ways that had nothing to do with professional concern. "I should let you go," he said suddenly, his voice hollow. "Take Dante somewhere safe, away from this circus." "Is that what you want?" "What I want doesn't matter." Carter's voice was raw with exhaustion and something deeper, something that sounded like despair. "I want to protect you. Both of you." Julie set the coffee down and moved closer, drawn by the pain in his voice. "What if I don't want to be protected? What if I want to stay and fight?" Carter's laugh was bitter, lacking any trace of humor. You don't understand what you're fighting. They're going to destroy me, Julie. My reputation, my business, everything I've built. And anyone close to me will get caught in the crossfire. Then tell me the truth. Julie's voice was stronger now, more determined. All of it. Let me decide what I can handle. For a long moment, Carter just stared at her, weighing something in his mind. Then, as if a dam had burst, the words began pouring out. He told her about Cecile Maddox, his former business partner who'd been making increasingly risky trades behind his back. How he'd discovered her illegal activities and confronted her, only to have her claim he'd authorized everything. How the evidence that would clear his name would also expose pension fund irregularities that would devastate thousands of retirees. She offered me a way out, Carter said quietly. If I take the fall for her trades, she'll make sure the pension funds stay protected. If I fight it, innocent people lose everything they've worked for their entire lives. Julie felt the pieces clicking into place like a puzzle solving itself. So you're sacrificing yourself to protect them. It seemed like the right thing to do. It is the right thing to do. Julie's voice was fierce with conviction. It's incredibly honorable and selfless and, she stopped abruptly, her eyes focusing on the documents scattered across his desk. Financial records, SEC correspondence, but also something else. Something that made her breath catch in her throat. Carter, she said slowly, reaching for a particular document. What is this? The paper in her hands was a detailed analysis of Cecile's trades, showing patterns and timestamps that clearly indicated Carter had been systematically excluded from the decision-making process. It was proof of his innocence, documented evidence that would clear his name completely. Where did this come from? Julie demanded, her voice sharp with hope and anger. Carter's expression was neutral, giving nothing away. Hudson had some private investigators looking into things. This proves you're innocent. Why aren't you using it? Because using it would expose how deep Cecile's deception went. The pension fund manipulations, the falsified records, it would all come out. Thousands of people would lose their retirement savings. Julie stared at him, finally understanding the full scope of his sacrifice. He wasn't just taking blame for trades he didn't make. He was protecting an entire community of innocent investors at the cost of his own reputation and freedom. You're willing to lose everything for people you don't even know, she whispered. They worked their whole lives for that money. They deserve to retire with dignity. In that moment, Julie's last defenses crumbled completely. This wasn't the cold, calculating businessman she'd been warned about. This was a man who would rather be destroyed than see innocent people suffer, who chose honor over self-preservation even when it cost him everything. She was completely, irrevocably in love with him. Julie. Carter's voice was rough, uncertain. Why are you looking at me like that? Instead of answering with words, Julie closed the distance between them. She stepped between his knees as he sat in his desk chair, her hands coming up to frame his face with infinite tenderness. Because you're the most honorable man I've ever known, she said softly. Because you're willing to sacrifice everything for what's right. Carter's breath caught. Julie, we can't, yes, we can. Her voice was steady now, full of certainty that burned away all her doubts. I'm tired of fighting this. Tired of pretending I don't feel what I feel. If we do this, Carter said roughly, his hands coming up to cover hers, there's no going back. The media will tear you apart. They'll make your life hell. Let them try. Julie's amber eyes burned with determination. I choose you, Carter. I choose us. That was all it took to shatter Carter's control completely. His hand slid into her hair as he pulled her down to him, their mouths crashing together with months of pent-up longing and desperate need. This wasn't the gentle almost kiss from the storm. This was raw hunger and emotional surrender, two people who'd fought their attraction until they couldn't fight anymore. Julie gasped against his mouth as Carter's hands gripped her hips, pulling her closer until she was practically sitting in his lap. The kiss deepened, became desperate, as if they were trying to pour months of suppressed feeling into this single moment of connection. "God, Julie," Carter groaned against her neck, his voice rough with want. "I've wanted this since the day you walked into my kitchen." "Then stop talking," Julie whispered, her hands fisting in his shirt, "and show me." The storm raging outside was nothing compared to the fire burning between them. They were done pretending, done fighting what they both knew was inevitable. They were finally giving in to the passion that had been consuming them both since the moment they met. But even as they lost themselves in each other, neither of them could forget the cameras waiting outside, ready to document every moment of their fall from grace. The question was whether their love would be strong enough to survive the coming storm. Chapter 4. The morning after changed everything and nothing at once. Julie woke in her own bed, but the memory of Carter's hands in her hair, his whispered confessions against her skin, burned through her like fever. They'd crossed every line they'd drawn between them, and there was no pretending otherwise. But the harsh light of day brought reality crashing down like a cold wave. The media circus outside had intensified overnight. More vans, more cameras, more shouted questions whenever anyone approached the gates. Julie's phone buzzed constantly with calls from numbers she didn't recognize, reporters who'd somehow gotten her contact information and wouldn't take silence for an answer. She found Carter in the kitchen, already dressed but looking like he hadn't slept a minute. When their eyes met, the air between them crackled with the memory of the night before, electric and dangerous. "Good morning," he said quietly, his voice rougher than usual. "Good morning." Julie's cheeks heated as she remembered exactly why his voice sounded like that, remembered the way he'd groaned her name in the darkness of his study. They moved around each other with hyper-awareness, both knowing that everything had changed but uncertain what it meant in daylight. The attraction that had simmered between them for weeks was now a live wire, sparking with every accidental touch, every shared glance. "The reporters called my phone," Julie said as she prepared coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. "I don't know how they got the number." Carter's jaw clenched tight. "I'll have it changed today." "They're not going to stop, are they?" "Not until they get bored or find a bigger story." Carter's voice was grim with experience. "Julie, about last night, don't." Julie turned to face him, chin lifted with stubborn determination. "Don't you dare apologize for what happened between us." "I wasn't going to apologize." Carter stepped closer, close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes. "I was going to say that I don't regret it. Any of it." Relief flooded through Julie's chest like warm honey. "Good. Because neither do I." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken promises and the weight of what they'd started. Then Dante's voice echoed from upstairs, calling for his mom, and reality intruded once again. The day brought fresh challenges that tested their newfound connection. Dante's school called to report that photographers were trying to take pictures through the fence during recess, treating an 8-year-old like tabloid fodder. Julie's sister Naomi left increasingly frantic voicemails about seeing Julie's name in gossip blogs. The siege was affecting every aspect of their lives, turning their sanctuary into a prison. But the worst came when Julie overheard Dante talking to one of his school friends on the phone, his young voice trying so hard to sound casual. "I can't have people over right now," Dante was saying. "There are too many cars outside and Mom says it's not safe." Julie's heart broke for her son, who was paying the price for adult complications he couldn't understand. When she found him later, curled up on his bed with a book, she sat beside him and smoothed his hair with gentle fingers. "Are you okay, baby?" Dante looked up with eyes that seemed too old for his face. "Why are those people taking pictures of us?" "We didn't do anything wrong." "No, we didn't." Julie pulled him close, fierce protectiveness surging through her. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and other grown-ups like to talk about it loudly." "Is Mr. Carter in trouble?" Julie chose her words with the care of someone defusing a bomb. "Some people think he is. But you know Mr. Carter, do you think he would hurt anyone?" Dante shook his head immediately, without hesitation. "Mr. Carter's nice. He let me sit in his car and he always asks about my homework. Bad people don't care about homework. Out of the mouths of babes. Julie kissed the top of her son's head, wondering how an 8-year-old could see Carter's character so clearly when the entire media establishment had missed it completely. That evening brought unexpected visitors. Hudson Stratton, Carter's mentor, arrived with a team of investigators and a grim expression that made Julie's stomach drop with dread. "We need to talk," Hudson told Carter, his eyes flicking meaningfully toward Julie. "Privately." "Julie stays," Carter said firmly, his voice broking no argument. "Whatever you have to say affects her too." Hudson's eyebrows rose at the possessive tone in Carter's voice, and Julie felt heat creep up her neck as the older man's knowing gaze moved between them with obvious understanding. "Very well," Hudson said finally. "We've uncovered new evidence about Cecile's activities." "It's worse than we thought." The documents Hudson spread across Carter's dining room table painted a picture of systematic fraud that went back years. Cecile hadn't just made illegal trades, she'd been skimming from client accounts, manipulating records, and using Carter's reputation to cover her tracks like a spider spinning an ever-widening web of deception. "This proves your innocence completely," Hudson said. "But it also exposes the full scope of her crimes. If we release this, thousands of people lose their retirement savings," Carter finished grimly. "I know. There might be another way," Hudson said slowly, like a man walking through a minefield. "If we can get Cecile to confess voluntarily, we might be able to structure a settlement that protects the pension funds while clearing your name." Julie felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. Would she do that? If the alternative is federal prison for fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering? Hudson's smile was sharp as a blade. She might be very motivated to cooperate. But approaching Cecile meant taking a huge risk. If she refused to cooperate, she might destroy evidence or flee the country. Carter would have one chance to get this right, one opportunity to save everyone including himself. "I'll talk to her," Carter decided, his voice final. "No." Julie's voice was sharp with fear that cut through the room like glass. "You can't trust her. She's already tried to destroy you once." "I have to try." Carter's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "It's the only way to protect everyone." Julie wanted to argue, wanted to lock Carter away somewhere safe until this nightmare was over. But she could see the determination in his eyes, the same integrity that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. "Then I'm coming with you," she said, her voice leaving no room for debate. "Absolutely not." Carter's response was immediate and fierce. "It's too dangerous." "I'm not asking permission." Julie's chin lifted with stubborn determination. "If you're walking into the lion's den, you're not doing it alone." Hudson watched their exchange with growing amusement, like he was witnessing something entertaining. "I think you've met your match, Carter." The meeting with Cecile was arranged for the following evening at a neutral location, a high-end restaurant where the public setting would provide some protection. Julie spent the day in a state of controlled panic, terrified of what might happen when Carter came face to face with the woman who'd tried to destroy him. She found Carter in his study that afternoon, staring out at the media encampment with an expression she couldn't read, lost in thoughts she couldn't access. "Having second thoughts?" she asked softly. "About facing Cecile?" "No." Carter turned to face her, his gray eyes intense with emotion. "About involving you in this mess?" "Every single day." Julie crossed to him, placing her hands on his chest where she could feel his heartbeat, strong and steady. "You didn't involve me. I chose to be here." "You chose to take a job," Carter corrected, his voice rough with emotion. "You didn't choose to fall in love with a man whose life is imploding." The words hung between them like a confession neither had been brave enough to speak before. "Love." The word felt huge and terrifying and absolutely right, like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. "You're right," Julie said quietly, watching Carter's face fall slightly. "I didn't choose to fall in love with you." Carter's expression cracked, pain bleeding through his usual control, and Julie realized how her words had sounded. I didn't choose it, she continued, her voice growing stronger, more certain, because it wasn't a choice at all. It just happened, like breathing or sunrise. I couldn't have stopped it if I'd tried. Carter's hands came up to frame her face, his touch infinitely gentle despite the storm raging inside him. I love you too, he said roughly. More than I ever thought possible. This time when they kissed, it was different from the desperate passion of the night before. This was a claiming, a promise, a declaration of war against everyone who would try to tear them apart. Whatever happens tonight, Julie whispered against his lips, we face it together. Together, Carter agreed, like an oath. That evening, they drove into the city with Hudson and his security team, the weight of what they were about to do pressing down on them like gravity. The restaurant Cecile had chosen was elegant and discreet, the kind of place where million-dollar deals were made over wine and perfectly prepared meals. Cecile was already waiting when they arrived, and Julie's first glimpse of Carter's former business partner was a shock. She'd expected someone villainous, but Cecile Maddox was strikingly beautiful, tall and blonde with the kind of polished perfection that money could buy and breeding could refine. Her eyes narrowed when she saw Julie beside Carter, calculating and cold. You brought your cook to a business meeting? Julie is here because I asked her to be, Carter replied evenly, his hand resting protectively on Julie's lower back. Cecile's laugh was like breaking glass, sharp and cutting. How fascinating. The great Carter Winslow, reduced to playing house with the help. Julie felt Carter tense beside her like a coiled spring, but she spoke before he could respond. I'm not the help, she said calmly, meeting Cecile's gaze without flinching. I'm the woman who's going to be standing beside him when this is all over. Something shifted in Cecile's expression, a flicker of surprise followed by cold calculation. She'd underestimated Julie, and Julie intended to make sure she paid for that mistake. Shall we get down to business? Carter said, his voice dangerously quiet. What followed was a battle of wills disguised as a civilized conversation. Hudson laid out the evidence methodically, showing Cecile exactly how much they knew about her illegal activities. With each document, each recorded conversation, each piece of damning evidence, Cecile's composure cracked a little more. You have two choices, Hudson said finally, his voice cutting through the restaurant's elegant atmosphere like a sword. Confess voluntarily and help us structure a settlement that protects the pension funds, or face federal charges that will put you in prison for the rest of your life. Cecile's mask slipped completely, revealing the calculating predator beneath the polished exterior. You think you've won, she said, her voice venomous with rage. But even if I confess, Carter's reputation will never fully recover. He'll always be the man who was accused of fraud, and you. Her gaze turned to Julie with pure malice. You'll always be the nobody who thought she could climb above her station. Julie felt every word like a physical blow, designed to cut and wound, but she kept her expression steady. She wouldn't give this woman the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. You're wrong, Julie said quietly, her voice steady as stone. Carter's reputation will recover because the truth always comes out eventually. And as for me? She smiled, sharp and sure. I never tried to climb above my station. I just fell in love with a man who sees my worth, even when people like you can't. Cecile's eyes flashed with fury, but before she could respond, Hudson placed a legal document on the table between them. Sign this, he said simply. Confess to the fraud, agree to the settlement terms, and this nightmare ends for everyone. For a moment, Julie thought Cecile might refuse. She could see the woman calculating, trying to find another angle, another way to destroy Carter even as she went down in flames. Then Cecile picked up the pen and signed her name with vicious strokes, like she was stabbing the paper. There, she said, throwing the pen down with violent force. Are you happy now? I'm satisfied, Carter replied, his voice steady. Justice has been served. As they left the restaurant, Julie felt like she could finally breathe again. The nightmare was over. Carter's name would be cleared, the pension funds would be protected, and they could finally build the life they both wanted. But their relief was short-lived. Waiting outside the restaurant was an army of photographers and reporters, tipped off about the meeting like vultures circling carrion. Camera flashes exploded in their faces as they tried to reach their car, questions shouted over the chaos like weapons. "Mr. Winslow. Is it true you're involved with your employee? Julie. How long have you been sleeping with your boss? Is this relationship why you're protecting him?" Julie felt Carter's arm tighten around her as they pushed through the crowd, his security team trying to clear a path. The questions were ugly, invasive, designed to humiliate and shame rather than inform. But Julie held her head high, her hand firmly clasped in Carter's, and faced the cameras with dignity. She was done hiding. Done being ashamed of loving a good man. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The battle for their love was just beginning. Chapter 5. The media-feeding frenzy that followed Cecile's confession was unlike anything Julie had ever experienced. Their photos were splashed across every gossip website and tabloid, with headlines that made her stomach turn: Billionaire's kitchen romance and from cook to conquest, inside the scandal's secret love story. But slowly, inevitably, the truth began to emerge like dawn breaking through storm clouds. Business publications started retracting their earlier stories about Carter's alleged fraud. The SEC issued a public statement clearing him of all wrongdoing. Major news outlets ran pieces about his sacrifice to protect innocent investors, painting him as a hero rather than a villain, transforming the narrative from scandal to redemption. The vindication should have felt like victory, but Julie found herself struggling with the aftermath in ways she hadn't expected. "You've been quiet," Carter observed one morning as they sat in his kitchen, their kitchen, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise paint the sound in shades of gold and pink. The media circus had finally moved on to fresher scandals, leaving them in blessed peace. But peace brought its own challenges, its own difficult questions that couldn't be answered with passion alone. "I keep thinking about what Cecile said," Julie admitted, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. "About me being nobody who thought she could climb above her station." Carter's coffee mug hit the counter with more force than necessary, the sharp sound echoing through the quiet kitchen. "She was trying to hurt you. Everything she said was calculated to cause maximum damage." But what if she wasn't wrong? Julie's voice carried all the insecurities she'd been fighting since childhood. "Look at us, Carter. Really look. You're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You went to Harvard, you move in circles I can barely imagine. I'm a single mom who barely finished high school." "Stop." Carter's voice was sharp with something that might have been anger or pain. "Don't you dare let that woman's poison into your head." "I'm not." Julie set down her own coffee, meeting his eyes directly. "I'm being realistic. What happens when this settles down? When you go back to your real life, your business empire, your world? Where do Dante and I fit into that picture?" Carter stared at her for a long moment, something profound shifting in his expression. Then, without warning, he stood up and disappeared into his study, leaving Julie alone with her doubts and the sound of her own heartbeat. Julie sat in the suddenly empty kitchen, anxiety gnawing at her stomach like hunger. Maybe she'd pushed too hard, asked questions he wasn't ready to answer. Maybe Cecile had been right after all, and this was the moment when reality crashed into fantasy. When Carter returned 5 minutes later, he was carrying a folder that he set on the counter between them with the careful precision of someone handling something precious. "Open it," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. With trembling fingers, Julie opened the folder and gasped at what she found inside. Restaurant plans. Detailed architectural drawings for a beautiful space with industrial-style fixtures and an open kitchen that looked like something from her wildest dreams. Financial projections that made her head spin. Business plans that showed someone had thought of everything. And at the top of the first page, in elegant script that took her breath away, Julie's table. "I bought the building 3 weeks ago," Carter said, his voice controlled but his hands shaking slightly. "It's in the city, prime location, everything you'd need to build the restaurant of your dreams. Julie's hands shook as she flipped through the documents, each page revealing more careful planning, more investment in her future than she'd ever dared imagine. It was everything she'd ever wanted, planned down to the smallest detail. The kitchen layout was perfect, the dining room elegant but welcoming, the business model sound and sustainable. Carter. She breathed, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he'd done. There's more. He pulled out another set of documents, legal papers that made Julie's eyes widen in shock. You're giving me the building, she whispered, hardly believing what she was seeing. I'm investing in your future. In our future. Carter's voice grew stronger, more certain with each word. You asked where you and Dante fit into my world? You don't fit into my world, Julie. You are my world. Tears spilled down Julie's cheeks as the magnitude of what he was offering hit her. Not just financial support, but belief in her dreams, investment in her success, partnership in every sense of the word that mattered. I can't accept this, she said, even as her heart screamed at her to say yes, to take this gift and run with it. Why not? Because. Julie struggled to find words that wouldn't hurt them both. Because I need to know that what's between us isn't about gratitude. I need to know that I chose you for who you are, not what you can give me. Carter was quiet for a long moment, understanding dawning in his gray eyes. Then he nodded slowly, gathering up the documents with careful hands. I understand. He put the papers back in the folder, but he didn't put them away. Then let me ask you something different. If I lost everything tomorrow, if the scandal had destroyed me completely and I had nothing left but the clothes on my back, would you still love me? Of course, Julie answered without hesitation, the truth of it ringing in her voice. Your money was never what I fell in love with. Then trust me when I say the same is true for me. Carter's gray eyes were intense, burning with conviction that took her breath away. I fell in love with a woman who makes me laugh, who challenges me, who sees through my walls to the man I really am. I fell in love with an incredible mother who would do anything for her child, a talented chef who creates magic in the kitchen, a strong woman who faces down reporters and billionaire businesswomen without flinching. Julie felt her defenses crumbling under the weight of his words, each one hitting her like a physical touch. I fell in love with you, Carter continued, his voice growing rough with emotion, not because you need rescuing, but because you don't. Because you're perfectly capable of building your own empire, and I want to be the man standing beside you when you do. Carter. Julie's voice broke on his name, overwhelmed by the love she saw in his eyes. Keep the restaurant plans, he said softly. Think about them. But know this. Whether you take my investment or find another way to build your dreams, I'll be here. Supporting you, believing in you, loving you. Before Julie could respond, Dante's voice echoed from upstairs, breaking the moment with perfect 8-year-old timing. Mom. Can we have pancakes? Coming, baby. Julie called back, wiping her tears. As she stood to start breakfast, Carter caught her hand in his touch warm and sure. One more thing, he said quietly. I know you're worried about Dante, about how all this affects him. But he deserves to know that the man who loves his mother isn't going anywhere. The words were a promise and a proposal rolled into one, and Julie felt her heart stop beating for just a moment. Carter, are you saying? I'm saying I want it all, Julie. You, Dante, this life we've built together. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're both safe and loved and mine. His voice dropped to a whisper. I want to marry you. Julie looked at this man who had turned her world upside down, who had shown her what it meant to be truly valued and cherished. The scared, practical voice in her head whispered warnings about moving too fast, about the differences in their backgrounds, about all the ways this could go wrong. But her heart was louder, stronger, more certain than any doubt. I want that too, she whispered, the words feeling like coming home. Carter's smile was like sunrise breaking over the ocean, transforming his entire face. Yeah? Yeah. This time when he kissed her, it was different from all the others. Not desperate or hungry or tinged with uncertainty. This was acclaiming, a sealing of promises, a kiss that tasted like forever and felt like coming home. They were interrupted by Dante padding into the kitchen in his pajamas, hair sticking up in all directions like he'd been struck by lightning. "Are you guys going to get married?" he asked with 8-year-old directness that cut straight to the heart of things. Julie and Carter broke apart, both laughing at his perfect timing. "What would you think about that?" Carter asked seriously, crouching down to Dante's eye level. Dante considered this with the gravity of someone making a life-altering decision. "Would I get to call you Dad?" "If you wanted to." "And would we live here forever? With the cool cars and the big kitchen?" "If that's what would make you happy." Dante's grin was incandescent, lighting up the entire kitchen. "Then yes, you should definitely get married. But first, can we have pancakes? All this mushy stuff is making me hungry." 6 months later, Julie stood in the kitchen of her restaurant, watching the controlled chaos of dinner service through the pass. The soft lighting created intimate pools of warmth throughout the dining room, where couples leaned close over plates of her signature dishes, creating their own stories of love and connection. Julie's table had opened to rave reviews and a 6-week waiting list that stretched into the new year. Food critics praised her innovative take on comfort food, her ability to create dishes that were both sophisticated and soul-satisfying. But more than the accolades and success, Julie loved what she'd built, a place where people came to celebrate life's important moments, where love was nurtured over perfectly prepared meals. "Chef?" Her sous chef appeared at her elbow, interrupting her thoughts. "Table 12 would like to compliment you on the braised short ribs. And Table 7 is asking if you're available to discuss catering their wedding." Julie smiled, feeling the deep satisfaction that came from doing work she loved with people she respected. "Tell Table 12 thank you, and I'll speak to Table 7 after service." As the evening wound down and the last customers lingered over dessert and coffee, Julie felt familiar arms wrap around her waist from behind, warm and strong and perfectly right. "How did we do tonight?" Carter asked, pressing a kiss to the side of her neck that made her shiver in the best way. "Fully booked, 3 proposals at Table 6, and Mrs. Henderson ordered 4 desserts because she couldn't choose between them. Sounds like another successful evening at the future Mrs. Winslow's restaurant." Julie leaned back against his chest, still amazed by how right it felt to be in his arms, how perfectly they fit together. They'd been married for 3 months now, a small ceremony on the beach behind their house with Dante as ring bearer and Hudson proudly walking Julie down the aisle in place of the father she'd lost years before. "How was Dante's soccer game?" she asked. 2 goals and an assist. The kid's got serious talent." Carter's pride in his new stepson was evident in every word. "He's waiting in the car, probably asleep by now. Hudson offered to drive him home so you could finish up here." Julie turned in Carter's arms, marveling at how different her life was from just 1 year ago. Then, she'd been desperate and struggling, wondering how she'd keep a roof over her son's head. Now, she was married to the love of her life, running her own successful restaurant, and watching Dante thrive in the stability they'd built together. "Ready to go home?" Carter asked softly. "Home." The word still gave Julie a little thrill every time she heard it. Not just because of the beautiful house they shared, but because of what it represented. Safety, love, belonging, all the things she'd stopped believing she deserved. Almost. Julie stood on her toes to kiss him, slow and sweet and full of promise for the night ahead. "I love you, you know." "I love you too." Carter's smile was the same one that had first made her pulse skip, back when she'd been just his chef instead of his wife, his partner, his everything. "Now come on. Let's go home and tuck our son into bed." Our son. Julie's heart swelled with gratitude for this man who had taken on her child as completely as if Dante were his own blood, who had given them both the family they'd always needed. As they walked out of the restaurant together, Julie's hand clasped firmly in Carter's, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. The scandal that had seemed like the end of the world had actually been the beginning of everything that mattered. Sometimes the greatest love stories started with the most impossible circumstances. Sometimes the people who seemed completely wrong for each other turned out to be perfectly right. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, love found you when you least expected it and changed your entire world. The kitchen where it all began was just the start. The real magic happened when two wounded hearts decided to trust each other enough to heal together, to build something beautiful from the ashes of their separate struggles. In the end, that was what love really was. Not the fairy tale romance of movies, but the daily choice to stand together, to support each other's dreams, to build a life that was bigger and more beautiful than anything either person could create alone. As Carter helped her into the car where Dante was indeed sleeping peacefully in the back seat, his face soft with innocent dreams, Julie smiled at the perfection of this ordinary moment. Her family, her restaurant, her dreams. All of it was real, all of it was theirs, all of it had been worth fighting for. She'd started as Carter's chef, but she'd become so much more. His partner, his equal, his forever. And that was exactly how love was supposed to work. What did you think of Carter and Julie's journey from resistance to passionate surrender? Have you ever had someone see past your walls to your true heart? Share your own stories of unexpected love in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, show us some love with a like and subscribe for tomorrow's new story. Your support means everything to our Dear Love Diaries family. What kind of story would you love to see next? A second chance romance, a forbidden love story, or maybe something completely unexpected? Let us know in the comments and we might just make it happen tomorrow.